In tonight's Tax Insider, calls to reform the IRS. Yesterday was tax day, and Senator Rob Portman took the opportunity to introduce new legislation. His bill seeks to secure the due process rights of taxpayers. Here with more is David Williams, president of the nonpartisan Taxpayers Protection Alliance. Dave, explain this measure for us. How would it work?
Well, first of all, Morris, tax day is probably the scariest time of year. I mean, it goes way beyond Halloween as to when people are the most frightened, mainly because it's really not the dollar amount that people are sending to the IRS. It's that they're afraid when they put their tax returns in that something is going to be wrong, and it's the power of the IRS. And this is what Portman's bill and what his language does. It really changes the tables to make sure that the taxpayers have more say in when they submit their taxes, and if there's any sort of disagreement with their taxes. There's really two key provisions. One is an appeals, that taxpayers can appeal decisions by the IRS, but also it goes after these outside counsel that the IRS is hiring to go after businesses, which is costing taxpayers millions and millions of dollars.
Now, the bill would also prevent the IRS from hiring outside law firms for audits. Why is that important?
This is critically important because the IRS started this, I guess, about a decade ago when it hired outside counsel to go after Microsoft. Now, this is the first time they've ever done this in the history of the IRS. They used outside counsel, and they were very secretive about this. We submitted Freedom of Information Act requests to the IRS, and they have refused to give us information. I shouldn't say refused. They said it'll cost you $17,000 for us to process this information. And guess what?
You broke the story for us. I remember now.
We did. And they may not have the information, so you're going to pay $17,000, and they may not even have any information for us to use. So this gets to the heart of transparency, but also, as I mentioned, millions of dollars that taxpayers are paying for this outside counsel to go after a business, and a business that wants to pay their taxes. Here's the rub, is that Microsoft's like, okay, what do we owe? We will pay the taxes, and the IRS has refused to settle.
Seems to me when you're hiring outsiders, they have to have some kind of a carrot on the stick. So they're looking for a commission, some brownie points for the IRS. They get part of the cut. I don't know, but it sounds fishy. What does this have to do with former IRS Commissioner Lois Lerner?
It has everything to do with Lois Lerner, because this gets to the abuse of the IRS. People are afraid to question the IRS, and especially when it comes to appeals, whether it's individual taxes or these groups that are trying to get their nonprofit status. It really sets up a situation where taxpayers have a greater voice. And someone like Lois Lerner, that can't happen again if this language is introduced. And really, this is not about Republicans and Democrats, because if a Republican ever becomes president, Republicans can abuse the power of the IRS. Right now it's the Democrats, but that could change very quickly. So this is about both sides of the political aisle wanting this to happen.
Now, Dave, your team put together a video for Tax Day. It's about 6 minutes long and focuses on some of the top tax issues of this presidential campaign. It also calls for comprehensive tax reform. Let's watch part of it.
Let's say last time we had a tax reform, let's say it was like 98?
Oh, I know.
It's been a while.
It's been forever.
The system seems really antiquated, so I'm going to go with like 95.
Probably in the 90s somewhere.
And so if I had to guess, maybe like 92, 91.
1992?
I believe it was either 1984 or 1986.
Reagan years?
I'm thinking Reagan era, man.
Reagan era. So,
80s, man.
yeah, take a guess what year in there.
86, man.
86 is absolutely correct.
Wow, it's a good video. Has it really been 30 years since Congress passed comprehensive tax reform? And was that Michi I recognized in the video? We've had him on the show.
Yeah,
asking the questions.
That was Michi Iliazzi, our communications and policy director.
Good job.
And it has been 30 years, and 30 years is a long time ago. Now, Morris, I don't know what your hair looked like 30 years ago, but I may have had a mullet, and I don't know if there's any photographic proof of that.
Those were the hair days, yeah.
Those
we all
were
had
the
a
hair
lot of
days,
hair,
indeed.
A lot of colorful. It was the days of Miami Vice, best TV show.
So 30 years ago, Morris, and we've had kind of tinkering around the edges. We had the Bush tax cuts, but we haven't had comprehensive tax reform since 1986. That's a long, long time.
All right, meanwhile, the federal government's budget deficit rose sharply in March to $108 billion. That's the biggest March deficit in 4 years. We're clearly on an unsustainable path here, Dave. Have lawmakers taken their eye off the ball?
they not only have taken their eye off the ball, but they're really clueless at this point, because at the beginning of the year, they were scheduled to have 111 days in office of actual work. So we're in April, towards the end of April, so that number's at about 70. So they just don't have time to address these issues. And there's easy ways to bring down the deficit. The GAO last year said there's $120 billion in improper payments. So they can get rid of that immediately. But because they're not in Washington, D.C., and they're only here for a limited amount of time, they don't offer amendments to cut spending. We don't have a budget done. We're not getting appropriations done. So there is really no opportunity to cut spending and to address a lot of these issues. So it's really their own fault. And Morris, get this, in the summer, they're taking 7 weeks off instead of their usual 6. I mean, this is how out of touch they are. So when they're in Washington, D.C., you know, there's very little time and they just can't get all this done.
Wow. You should run for president. Real quick before we go, the folly of the D.C. trolley, have you ridden it yet?
I have not ridden it. I have been close to it. I've been near it. And we're going to be doing a follow-up because we want to know what the ridership numbers are on the trolley, because they've spent $200 million, as we've talked about before, $174,000 on the website. We want to know how many people are riding this trolley. They're not collecting money yet,
right.
So it's going to be a complete loss until they start collecting money. But we want to know exactly how many people are riding this white elephant.
All right. Thanks for all the news today. David Williams, president of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance.
Thank you.